It had been a long and exhausting day, and all I wanted was a few moments of peace after getting home. The house was unusually quiet, with only the faint ticking of the kitchen clock echoing through the hallway. I tossed my keys onto the table, took off my jacket, and walked toward the bathroom, thinking about taking a hot shower to wash away the stress of the day. As I reached for the bathroom door, I noticed something strange. The light inside was already on. I was certain I had turned it off before leaving that morning. A sudden feeling of uneasiness settled over me. I froze for a moment, listening carefully. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard a faint rustling sound, followed by what seemed like a quiet sob. My heart began pounding as countless thoughts raced through my mind. Had someone broken into my house? Was there an intruder hiding inside? Carefully, I grabbed the nearest object I could use to defend myself and slowly pushed the bathroom door open. The room looked normal at first glance, but the shower curtain was completely closed. It gently moved as though someone was standing behind it. Holding my breath, I stepped closer, every movement feeling slower than the last. My hands were shaking as I reached out and slowly pulled the curtain aside. Standing there was a teenage girl, no older than 16 or 17. She looked absolutely terrified. Her clothes were soaked from the rain, her long hair clung to her face, and her eyes were red from crying. She immediately stepped backward, pressing herself against the wall as if expecting to be attacked. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, shivering uncontrollably, her face pale with fear and exhaustion. It was obvious she had not eaten properly or slept in a long time. Every expression on her face showed panic, desperation, and hopelessness. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence felt overwhelming. She stared at me with frightened eyes, watching every movement I made, while I tried to understand how she had ended up inside my home. There were no signs of forced entry, making the mystery even more confusing. She looked as though she had been hiding there for quite some time, terrified that someone would discover her. Every small sound from outside seemed to make her flinch. Even the distant noise of a passing car caused her to glance nervously toward the window. Trying not to frighten her any further, I slowly lowered the object I was holding and spoke as calmly as I could. I told her she didn't need to be afraid and asked who she was and whether she was hurt. Instead of answering, tears filled her eyes. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. She looked toward the bathroom door several times, almost expecting someone to burst into the house at any moment. The fear on her face was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't the fear of being caught stealing or trespassing, it was the fear of someone running for their life. As I looked more closely, I noticed small bruises on her arms and scratches on her hands. Her shoes were muddy and one of them had a torn sole, suggesting she had been walking for miles. Her backpack lying in the corner of the shower contained only a few worn clothes, an empty water bottle, and what appeared to be a small stuffed toy that she held tightly whenever she became frightened. It looked as though she had left home in a hurry with almost nothing. When I gently asked if someone was chasing her, her entire body stiffened. She didn't answer directly, but her terrified expression was enough to reveal that something was terribly wrong. She quietly whispered only 3 words that sent a chill down my spine: "Please don't tell." Before I could ask what she meant, she began crying uncontrollably, sliding down the shower wall until she was sitting on the floor, completely overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion. At that moment, I realized this was far more than an ordinary misunderstanding. A frightened runaway girl had somehow found her way into my home, and whatever she was running from was serious enough to make hiding inside a stranger's shower seem like her safest choice. The sight of the frightened girl sitting silently on the bathroom floor stayed with me. Every instinct told me she needed help, but it was equally clear that any sudden movement or harsh question would only make her more afraid. Instead of demanding answers, I took a slow step back to give her some space. In the calmest voice I could manage, I told her that she was safe for the moment and that no one was going to hurt her while she was inside my home. She didn't respond, but her trembling became slightly less noticeable. She kept her eyes fixed on me, studying every expression on my face as if trying to decide whether I could be trusted or whether I was just another person who would eventually betray her. I quietly left the bathroom door open and walked into the kitchen, making sure every movement was slow enough that she could hear where I was going. A few minutes later, I returned carrying a glass of water, a warm cup of tea, and a plate with sandwiches and fruit. I placed everything on the bathroom counter without stepping too close to her. At first, she refused to touch any of it. She looked at the food with suspicion, then looked back at me. It was obvious that hunger was fighting against fear. After several long minutes, her shaking hand slowly reached for the glass of water. She drank it carefully, almost as if she expected someone to snatch it away. Then she cautiously picked up a small piece of bread and ate it in tiny bites. Watching her eat made it painfully clear that she hadn't had a proper meal in quite some time. Realizing how cold and uncomfortable she must have been, I found a clean towel, a warm blanket, and a set of comfortable clothes that would fit her. I placed them outside the bathroom and stepped away so she wouldn't feel embarrassed. Through the slightly open door, I softly told her that she could change whenever she felt ready. Several minutes passed before I heard the quiet sound of the shower curtain moving again. When she finally emerged, she looked slightly cleaner and warmer, but the fear in her eyes had not disappeared. She still clutched her small backpack tightly against her chest, refusing to let it out of her sight even for a moment. To make the house feel less intimidating, I sat several feet away in the living room instead of standing over her. I turned on a small lamp, keeping the lights soft and comfortable rather than bright and harsh. The quiet atmosphere seemed to ease her nerves. I avoided asking personal questions and instead spoke about ordinary things, the weather, my neighborhood, and how peaceful the evenings usually were. Gradually, she stopped staring at the front door every few seconds. Although she remained silent, her breathing became steadier. She seemed surprised that someone could simply sit beside her without expecting anything in return. After nearly an hour of silence, she finally whispered a single word. Emily. It was the first thing she had said other than begging me not to tell anyone. I smiled gently and introduced myself without pressing for more information. For a while, we simply sat in silence again. Eventually, she began speaking in short, hesitant sentences. She explained that she had been traveling alone for several days, sleeping wherever she could find shelter. Some nights she stayed in abandoned buildings, while other nights she hid behind stores or inside bus stations until morning. She admitted that she was constantly looking over her shoulder because she believed someone was searching for her. Whenever she reached the difficult parts of her story, her voice would fade away. She would stop talking completely, staring at the floor with tears gathering in her eyes. It was obvious that painful memories were overwhelming her. I never interrupted or pressured her to continue. Instead, I simply listened. For the first time in what seemed like a very long time, someone was listening without judging, blaming, or doubting her. That simple act appeared to mean more to her than I could have imagined. As the evening grew later, Emily slowly revealed fragments of her past. She described living in constant fear, never knowing when another argument would begin or when she would have to protect herself. She spoke of nights filled with shouting, broken promises, and loneliness. She explained that she had tried asking for help before, but each attempt only made her situation worse. Eventually, she became convinced that running away was her only chance to escape. She packed the few belongings she could carry, waited until everyone was asleep, and disappeared into the darkness without knowing where she would end up. Even as she shared these painful memories, she carefully avoided mentioning certain names or specific details. Whenever I gently asked who she was afraid of, she immediately became tense, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. Her eyes darted toward the windows, and she lowered her voice to almost a whisper. She admitted only that the people she had escaped from would not stop looking for her. She believed they would do everything possible to bring her back, and that thought terrified her more than sleeping alone on the streets ever had. Every word she spoke revealed that earning her trust had taken patience, kindness, and quiet understanding. But the full truth behind her desperate escape was still hidden beneath layers of fear she was not yet ready to uncover. As Emily became more comfortable talking, the gaps in her story slowly began to disappear. What had first sounded like the desperate escape of a frightened teenager was turning into something far more serious. Every new detail she revealed painted a darker picture than the last. She often paused in the middle of a sentence, taking deep breaths before continuing, as though reliving each memory was almost too painful to bear. I listened carefully without interrupting, allowing her to share only what she felt ready to say. It was becoming increasingly clear that she had not run away because of a simple disagreement or a desire for freedom. She had fled because she genuinely believed her life and safety were in danger. She explained that for months she had lived in constant fear. Every day felt unpredictable and every night was even worse. She never knew what kind of mood the adults around her would be in or what might happen next. The home that should have protected her had become a place where she felt trapped and powerless. Instead of feeling safe behind locked doors, she counted the hours until morning, hoping each night would pass without another terrifying incident. Eventually, the fear became stronger than the fear of leaving everything behind. One evening, she quietly packed a few clothes, her old backpack, and the small stuffed toy she had treasured since childhood. Without knowing where she would go, she slipped out into the darkness and never looked back. Life on the streets proved far more difficult than she had imagined. She wandered from town to town, avoiding crowded places whenever possible. She slept in bus stations, abandoned buildings, empty parks, and anywhere she thought she could remain unnoticed until sunrise. She survived on small snacks bought with the little money she had managed to save. When the money ran out, she sometimes skipped meals entirely. She constantly looked over her shoulder, believing that every unfamiliar face might belong to someone searching for her. The lack of sleep, hunger, and fear slowly drained her strength, but she refused to return because she believed going back would be even more dangerous. As she continued speaking, Emily reached into her backpack and carefully pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. The edges were worn from being handled so many times. She silently handed it to me. Across the front was a missing person notice with her photograph. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary appeal asking the public to help find a runaway teenager. But Emily immediately shook her head. "That's not the whole story," she whispered. She explained that the notice made it appear as though everyone was desperately worried about her safety, but according to her, the people looking for her were not trying to rescue her. She believed they wanted to force her back into the same environment she had risked everything to escape. She admitted that seeing her own face displayed on posters and shared online had made her even more frightened. Every stranger who looked at her for too long made her wonder whether they recognized her. The fear she carried became obvious whenever there was the slightest noise outside the house. A car slowing down on the street caused her to freeze completely. Someone knocking on a neighbor's door made her grip the blanket tightly. Even the sound of footsteps passing the front gate made her breathing quicken. She repeatedly walked to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to look outside before quickly stepping away again. She seemed convinced that someone would eventually discover where she was hiding. Late that evening, her fears suddenly felt much more real. Through the living room window, I noticed a dark-colored vehicle driving slowly past the house. It continued down the street before turning around several minutes later and passing by once again. Emily happened to glance outside at the same moment. The color immediately disappeared from her face. Her hands began shaking violently, and she instinctively stepped backward into the hallway. "That's the same car," she whispered with visible panic. "I've seen it before." I looked outside again, but by then the vehicle had already disappeared around the corner. There was no way to know whether it was simply someone driving through the neighborhood or whether Emily's fear was justified. Still, her reaction was impossible to ignore. She wasn't acting like someone imagining danger. Her expression reflected genuine terror, the kind that comes from painful experiences rather than simple anxiety. Only a short time later, another unsettling moment followed. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Emily gasped and immediately rushed toward the bathroom, hiding behind the shower curtain exactly where I had first found her. She covered her mouth with both hands to keep from making any sound. Her entire body trembled uncontrollably. It took several minutes before I even approached the front door. Looking through the peephole, I discovered it was only a delivery driver who had arrived at the wrong address. After the driver left, I returned to the bathroom and gently assured Emily that no one was there for her. Even after hearing my explanation, she remained hidden for several minutes before cautiously stepping back into the hallway. The constant fear, the missing person notice, the mysterious vehicle, and Emily's overwhelming panic all pointed to one undeniable reality. Whatever she had escaped from continued to haunt her every waking moment. She wasn't simply running away from a difficult past. She believed there were people actively searching for her, and every passing hour made her more certain that they were getting closer. The following morning, both of us knew that simply remaining hidden inside the house could not continue forever. Emily had begun to trust me enough to share her fears, but fear alone could not solve the situation. She needed real protection from people trained to help vulnerable young people. Before taking any action, we spent hours discussing every possibility. I promised her that I would not make decisions behind her back and that I would explain every step before it happened. That promise seemed to calm her, even though the uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. After careful consideration, I contacted a local youth crisis service that specialized in helping runaway teenagers and young people escaping unsafe situations. I explained only the basic facts at first, protecting Emily's privacy while asking what the safest course of action would be. The counselor on the phone spoke patiently and assured me that their first priority was always the young person's immediate safety and well-being. They explained that every situation was investigated carefully and that no conclusions would be made without listening to Emily herself. Hearing those words gave both of us a small sense of relief. Even so, Emily remained nervous about meeting anyone. She worried that no one would believe her story or that she would be forced back into the same environment she had escaped. I reassured her that she deserved to be heard and that telling the truth was the most important step toward protecting herself. After a long conversation, she finally agreed to meet with trained professionals, but only if I stayed with her during the initial interview. I agreed without hesitation. Later that afternoon, we arrived at a safe office where experienced counselors welcomed Emily with kindness rather than suspicion. They did not overwhelm her with difficult questions or pressure her to speak immediately. Instead, they offered her water, comfortable seating, and plenty of time to settle down. Their calm approach slowly eased her anxiety. When she finally began speaking, she described everything she had endured, carefully explaining why she had believed running away was her only option. Although sharing those memories brought tears to her eyes, she continued because she wanted someone to finally understand what she had been living through. The counselors listened attentively, taking detailed notes while making sure Emily felt supported throughout the conversation. Whenever she became overwhelmed, they paused to give her time to collect herself. They reassured her that her feelings were valid and that her safety would remain the highest priority while they carefully reviewed all the information she provided. For the first time in a very long time, Emily felt that adults were listening without judging her or dismissing her fears. As trained professionals reviewed the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, additional information began to emerge. Conversations with other individuals, documented evidence, and independent interviews helped paint a much clearer picture of what had been happening before Emily fled. Investigators worked carefully to separate facts from assumptions, ensuring that every claim was examined thoroughly and fairly. Rather than rushing to conclusions, they focused on understanding the full situation so that the right decisions could be made based on reliable evidence. Over the next several days, Emily remained in a secure, supportive environment where she could finally sleep without constantly fearing that someone would find her. She received clean clothes, regular meals, and access to counseling that helped her begin processing the emotional weight she had carried for so long. Each day, she appeared slightly more relaxed. The constant tension in her shoulders slowly disappeared, and she no longer startled at every sound outside the window. Although the painful memories had not vanished, she was beginning to experience something she had almost forgotten: peace. Meanwhile, the official investigation continued. Authorities interviewed witnesses, examined available records, and followed every credible lead. As more evidence came together, they gained a clearer understanding of the circumstances that had led Emily to flee. The findings helped ensure that appropriate legal and protective measures could be taken where necessary, while keeping Emily's safety and well-being at the center of every decision. The process was careful, thorough, and focused on establishing the truth rather than making assumptions. Throughout this time, I stayed in contact with Emily, visiting whenever permitted and reminding her that she was not alone. Our conversations gradually changed. Instead of speaking only about fear and survival, she began talking about ordinary things she had once dreamed of doing: returning to school, making friends without hiding secrets, reading books again. And one day living in a place where she would never have to look over her shoulder. Hearing those hopes return to her voice showed just how much she had begun to heal. As the days passed, Emily's confidence slowly grew. She started participating in counseling sessions more openly and worked with the professionals to create a plan for her future. For the first time since she had arrived unexpectedly in my home, she no longer believed that running and hiding were her only options. She was beginning to understand that with the support of caring people and the protection of responsible authorities, she could face the truth without facing it alone. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life slowly began to change in ways she had never imagined possible. The constant fear that had once controlled every decision gradually started to fade. She was placed in a secure and supportive environment where trained caregivers treated her with patience, kindness, and respect. Instead of waking up frightened by every unfamiliar sound, she began each morning knowing she was safe. The simple routines of eating regular meals, sleeping through the night, and having people genuinely concerned about her well-being felt completely unfamiliar at first. But little by little, they became part of her new life. Although she was finally safe, the emotional wounds she carried did not disappear overnight. Some mornings she woke from nightmares, remembering the fear that had driven her to run away. Loud noises occasionally made her tense, and unexpected visitors still caused moments of anxiety. The counselors reminded her that healing was a gradual process and that there was nothing unusual about needing time to recover from painful experiences. They encouraged her to express her thoughts through conversations, writing, drawing, and other healthy activities, instead of keeping every emotion locked inside. With each counseling session, Emily became slightly more confident in sharing her feelings and trusting the people who genuinely wanted to help her. One of the biggest steps forward came when she enrolled in school again. At first, she was nervous about meeting new classmates and worried that everyone would know about her past. The teachers and staff welcomed her warmly while respecting her privacy, allowing her to adjust at her own pace. During the first few days, she remained quiet, speaking only when necessary. Gradually, however, she began answering questions in class, joining group activities, and smiling during conversations with other students. She discovered that many people accepted her for who she was in the present rather than judging her by the difficult experiences she had survived. Outside the classroom, Emily explored interests she had never been able to pursue before. She spent hours in the library reading novels, joined an art club where she discovered a talent for painting, and participated in volunteer projects that helped other young people in need. Every new activity gave her another opportunity to rebuild her confidence. Instead of constantly thinking about escaping danger, she started thinking about achieving goals and creating a future filled with possibility. The frightened teenager who had once hidden silently behind a shower curtain was slowly becoming a young woman who believed in her own abilities. Our friendship continued throughout this journey. We occasionally met for coffee or talked on the phone, reflecting on how dramatically life had changed since the day we first met. Emily often laughed about how unbelievable it seemed that a random decision to hide inside a stranger's house had completely altered the course of her life. She admitted that when she first stepped into my bathroom, she expected only another temporary hiding place before continuing her desperate journey. She never imagined that single moment would connect her with people who would help her rebuild everything she thought she had lost. As the months passed, Emily's confidence continued to grow. She began mentoring other teenagers who were struggling with difficult situations, sharing her experiences carefully without dwelling on painful details. She wanted others to understand that asking for help was not a sign of weakness but an act of courage. Whenever she met someone overwhelmed by fear or uncertainty, she spoke with compassion because she understood exactly how hopeless those feelings could become. Her ability to encourage others came not from perfection, but from surviving hardship and choosing to move forward one step at a time. The people who had supported Emily throughout her recovery noticed remarkable changes in her personality. The quiet, frightened girl who rarely made eye contact gradually became someone who smiled more often, participated confidently in conversations, and looked toward the future with determination. She began setting long-term goals for herself, including continuing her education and eventually working in a profession where she could support vulnerable young people facing challenges similar to those she had once endured. Rather than allowing her past to define her, she used it as motivation to build a life based on hope, resilience, and compassion. One afternoon, nearly a year after our first meeting, Emily returned to my house for a visit. Standing in the doorway, she smiled warmly as she looked toward the bathroom where everything had begun. She quietly admitted that she could still remember every detail of that terrifying day: the sound of the bathroom door opening, the fear that someone had finally found her, and the overwhelming relief when she realized she had encountered kindness instead of harm. This time, however, her eyes reflected confidence rather than panic. She no longer saw that room as a hiding place, but as the unexpected turning point that had led her towards safety, healing, and the opportunity to build a completely different future. Sometimes life changes in the most unexpected moments. A frightened girl who believed she had nowhere left to turn found hope behind an ordinary bathroom door, while one simple act of kindness transformed two lives forever. Emily's journey proved that even after experiencing fear, loneliness, and uncertainty, a brighter future is possible when courage is met with compassion. Not every hero wears a cape. Sometimes a hero is simply someone who chooses to listen instead of judge, to protect instead of ignore, and to offer hope when someone has lost everything. A single act of kindness can become the turning point that changes another person's entire life. If this story touched your heart, remember to show kindness whenever you can. You never know who might be silently struggling or desperately searching for hope. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring and emotional stories.